Now, as we continue on to this week's topic, which is the 5 opportunities to thrive, TC's on his way out of his enclosure. He did decide that he's going to join us tonight. So as soon as he's all the way out, I will go and get him so that he can join us on video. I want to start out by saying a lot of the information that I share with you all comes from the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Some of it comes from the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums, and some of it comes from the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants. These are organizations that I belong to, and my training, my degree is in applied science of zookeeping technology. We apply many principles of zookeeping here at the animal sanctuary that I direct. I really feel like associations like the IAABC, the AZA, TC did come out of his enclosure and he was getting into an area where I really didn't want him, so I decided I would go and get him. As I started explaining, many of the concepts and welfare criteria that I talk about are as a result of my training in applied science of zookeeping technology and my affiliation with the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants and the Certification Council for Professional Dog Trainers. I really feel like the AZA and these other organizations are the forerunners in progressive animal welfare when we're talking about captive animal management. Hi everyone, it's Lori with Behavior Education at Spirit Keeper Equine Sanctuary. I am joined today by Tao Seti from Reach Out Reptiles. Today is Sunday, July 12th, 2020. This is Super Dwarf Sunday, episode number 49. And today we're going to talk about the 5 opportunities to thrive. Last week we talked about welfare science and how that differs from animal rights versus animal ethics. This week, we're going to review the definition of welfare science, and then we're going to go over what the 5 opportunities to thrive are. Just to review, welfare science applies rigorous scientific methods using a variety of behavioral and physiological measures as indicators of animal welfare for the purpose of providing objective data. I also want to point you in the direction of a really great resource if you want to learn more about the principles of welfare science. That is the IAABC, the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants. They have about a 45-minute webinar about welfare science. I have done that webinar and it's a really good source of information if you want to learn more about welfare science and what it means. I also would point you in the direction of the Campbell Center for the Study of Animal Welfare, because they do a good job of explaining what welfare science is. They say that welfare scientists investigate the well-being of animals managed by humans. This means, for example, animals living as pets on farms and sanctuaries and research labs and zoos, and that welfare science helps to improve animals' lives in an evidence-based way and touches on fundamental biological problems. The typical aims of welfare science are to assess the relative impact of our current practices, like different handling methods or different types of housing on animals, and to try and identify objectively those which are best for welfare and so that our animals have a good quality of life. This week, we are going to talk about the 5 opportunities to thrive. I want to start by going over the 2017 AZA accreditation standards as it relates to animal welfare and the 5 opportunities to thrive. The AZA Zoo and Aquarium standards support the premise of the 5 opportunities to thrive. And these tenets are based on Vicino and Miller's work in 2015. Those 5 opportunities to thrive are the opportunity for a well-balanced diet, the opportunity to self-maintain, the opportunity for optimal health, the opportunity to express species-specific behavior, and opportunities for choice and control. Now, I want to go over each one of these in a little bit more detail, and I also want to talk about how they relate to some other things we've discussed in previous videos. All right, the first opportunity to thrive talks about clean drinking water and a well-balanced diet, and it's got to be suitable for the species as well as for the individual animal. You need to look at the species' natural biology and natural history and make sure that the diet and the way that that diet is presented to them, as well as the water and how that's being presented to them, goes in line with their natural biology. You also need to look at the individual animal. If for some reason the individual animal under captive management has a physical disability or a special dietary requirement, then those need to be met as well. Remember that one of our previous videos discussed dietary enrichment? Well, in a paper published in 2011, which I will of course cite in the video description, spatial and temporal distribution of food was shown to increase species appropriate behavior. Does that sound familiar? Things such as varied feeding times and providing complex feeding devices encourage natural foraging behavior. We talked about things like this in detail in our video about dietary or food enrichment. So if you haven't seen that video, please check that out. The second opportunity to thrive is the one that discusses providing an environment suitable for the species and to the individual animal. Again, you're going to look at the species' natural history as well as the individual animal and any special needs that it has when you're providing a suitable environment. And this is going to include everything like shelter, hides, substrates, and opportunities to self-maintain. You want to consider both vertical and horizontal spaces and how those could be used when viewed through the perception of the animal. Let's talk about TC for a minute and think about how Tau Ceti views his world and the things that would be natural for Tau Ceti to do. Well, we know that Tau Ceti likes to swim. He spends a lot of time in the water. So we would want to make sure that in an appropriate habitat, under captive management, Tau Ceti is being provided opportunities to swim and water to soak in. We also know that Tau Ceti enjoys climbing. We've seen him in many of our previous videos climbing. And we want to make sure that in his habitat, not just when he's out for exercise or for enrichment activities, that he has appropriate things to climb on in his everyday living space. You also want to think about the size of the enclosure and that it's sufficient to meet the animal's physical and behavioral needs, and especially if they're not able to come out for exercise. So if you have an animal who never gets out of their regular habitat, then you definitely want to make sure that it's large enough that they can get appropriate exercise and express all of those species-specific behaviors that they need to for optimal welfare. Opportunity to thrive, number 3, means that you're providing an environment that supports optimal health, and also means that you have access to prompt diagnosis and treatment of injury or disease. And that means that whether you're working at a facility or you're a private keeper, that you have really fast access to a veterinarian. When needed, you can get really quick diagnostics done and that you can get that animal treated very quickly. Now let's move on to the fourth opportunity to thrive, and that is that habitats encourage species-specific behaviors with appropriate diversity and at appropriate frequencies, and that they provide appropriate social groupings that are natural to the species. The environment not only has to be large enough and have things that the animal can use to express species-specific behaviors, but they need to have the appropriate diversity in that environment. As we've discussed with Tau Ceti, he likes to both swim and climb, so we would want to provide the diversity of choices for him that he could swim or climb. And then, of course, we're also going to provide him opportunities for terrestrial hides, elevated hides, burrowing if he chooses, humid hides if he chooses. We just want to make sure that his environment is diverse. We also want to make sure that he can utilize those things at a frequency of his choosing. So we wouldn't want to say just place a climbing structure in his enclosure for a few minutes or a few hours every day. Whatever the normal frequency would be, that he would swim in the wild or that he would climb in the wild or that he would rest in a hide in the wild, needs to also be provided for him in his captive setting. The last part of number 4 talks about providing appropriate species social groupings. And there's a lot to unpack in number 4. So let's start from the beginning, and then we'll finish up with this social groupings thing, which we know can be pretty complicated when we're talking about snakes. Remember that in many of our previous videos, as well as in a paper I think that I've previously mentioned or cited by Mellen et al. That was published in 2001, that environmental enrichment provides opportunities for animals to engage in species-appropriate behaviors and that it meets their behavioral needs. So what I'm about to tell you should come as no surprise, since we just completed a series of videos about snake enrichment, and I also just published an article about enrichment for snakes and other reptiles that was published in the July 2020 edition of the Herpetoculture magazine. If you're interested in reading that, you can read that free online, and I'll put the link to that in the video description. So while it should come as no surprise, this is need-to-know information. Research by Meagher et al. From 2014 regarding animal welfare suggests that giving animals basic environmental enrichment can improve their welfare as well as their reproductive health. And then what I find really, really interesting is that current research published by Latham and Mason in 2010 suggests that taking away environmental enrichment is worse for the animal than never having given them that enrichment in the first place. Let that sink in for a minute and think about that. And I'm going to repeat it because this is really important. Taking away environmental enrichment has a larger impact on an animal's welfare than never having given the animal the enrichment in the first place. I think that that is huge, because that definitely shows the animals know a difference. They miss things when they aren't there, and actually impacts their welfare in a bad way once they've been given enrichment and then it's been taken away. Number 4 had a lot going on there, and the very last thing that number 4 mentioned was appropriate social groupings for the animals. Now, this is complicated for snakes because you can't just generalize and say all snakes are solitary animals and should be kept alone. And you can't generalize the other way and say, well, snakes need a companion. Because research has shown us that some species of snakes are social, like garter snakes and rattlesnakes. They live in communal groups and they have social relationships with conspecifics. But on the other end of the spectrum, we know that some snakes are solitary in nature. The eastern indigo snake, for example, has been known to be cannibalistic, and it isn't recommended to keep them together. When you are thinking about your snake, whether you're keeping it for a facility or you're a private keeper, you need to research your individual species and find out, do they tend to live together in the wild or not? Do they have the predisposition to be cannibalistic or not? Are they a snake that typically eats other snakes or not? So you wouldn't want to take a snake that is known for a fact to live communally in the wild and make them live a solitary life. But on the other hand, you wouldn't want to take a snake that's known to be cannibalistic against their own species in the wild and throw them into a habitat with conspecifics. That would probably not end well. So please do your research on the individual snake and determine whether it's appropriate to house them with others or not. Providing opportunities for animals to exercise choice and control is the 5th opportunity to thrive, and it's a huge part of what we do here at Behavior Education. I think it's extremely important to provide animals choice and control over outcomes that are meaningful to them. And this is important because choice and control and the ability to say no is very meaningful to all animals. Behavior science teaches us that freedom is extremely reinforcing, including the freedom to make meaningful choices over our own actions. And this applies to all animals, not just humans, not just mammals, but reptiles and snakes as well. One of the other things that we've previously talked about in videos is training as cognitive enrichment. And to this subject, and very relevant to number 5 on our list of opportunities to thrive, Miller et al. In 2011 published a paper that stated positive reinforcement training can assist individual animals in learning to manipulate their environment and exert control over choices provided. And this becomes very important. We teach a lot of cooperative behaviors here to our snakes. TC is learning cooperative behaviors. He's learning to shift. He's learning to station on a scale. By teaching cooperative behaviors and by giving the animals the ability to say no, it can help us assess their mental state, and it can also help us assess their physical well-being. If we have taught the animals through training to voluntarily participate in their own care and do things like shift from their primary habitat to a secondary habitat or to voluntarily station on a scale, and they readily do this all the time without any issues, and then suddenly they aren't doing it, that can be a red flag that something's going on with them and that we need to look at their mental or physical well-being and see what's changed. A drastic change in his behavior like that would prompt me to have a physical exam done and try and figure out what's going on. If we're forcing those behaviors, if we are forcing the animals out of their enclosures and we're forcing the animals to be weighed and we're forcing the animals to do some of these other behaviors that are involved in their daily management, then we're not going to know if they're feeling well or not, because we aren't giving them the choice and control to opt out of those behaviors. We're not giving them the choice and control to say, no, I don't feel like being weighed today, or no, I don't feel like shifting today. And again, if that animal always shifts or always stations on the scale, and we never have any issues with that, and they're always eager to do it, and then suddenly they're not eager to do it, it can indicate that something's wrong. These 5 opportunities to thrive complement the 5 domain model of animal welfare, which was put forth in 2015 by Meagher et al. And it's used as the framework for the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums in their welfare strategy. TC and I want to thank all of you for joining us again this week. We hope that you caught his training session midweek. We are coming up on our 50th episode. I hope that you will join us. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, please remember to always be kind and love your animals.